Let's talk about the National Convention of Social Movements on the political agenda for this year. National Convention of Social Movements. What does that mean?
What it basically means is that the social movements are convening tomorrow, and it's related to city's proverb. That we are tired of reading the book of lamentations and lamenting and complaining. How can we change the narrative? And we change the narrative by providing alternatives.
Who are social movements? Maybe we could start from there.
Social movements are a community of conscience, a community of practice, who behave in a particular way of doing things. We draw our membership from informal settlements, from trade unions, from civil society organizations, and from individuals who may be converted like yourselves. And I hope that when you step out of the studio, we will have converted you to join us tomorrow, who believe that there's a way we need to govern ourselves as a people. And by governing ourselves, we need to have alternatives to the problems that we have as a nation. So tomorrow we convene at Muungano to have this conversation around the 2022 general elections and what our aspirations are.
And how would the aspirations be realized and concretized? Because I'm sure various communities or various people who will be meeting there, each of them have the different aspirations. Is it a convention to say, so what is it that you'd like to see for the future of the country, or what you'd like to see in leadership in this country from August? How is this conversation going to be?
So the aspirations can only be realized if they're turned into policy documents that are later implementable. And you're very certain that after August, then we shall get into a planning phase in the next government, be it at the county or at the national level. So aspirations that we shall speak about tomorrow shall be social contracts between us and those who are aspiring for various offices. But then when they get to the phase of planning, then we will now translate this into planning documents. At the county level, it's our expectation that this is in the county integrated development plans. At the national level, then it will be the interpretation of the national government functions. And that's our interpretation of People's Manifesto tomorrow.
Something that you've said which makes a lot of sense. The applicability capacity that it's supposed to have is what I find a little doubtful. Social contract, I understand. Actioning it, that and I understand. Accountability, to ensure that it's upheld. That always is the question. How do you get beyond this question and ensure that what you've actually gotten into is something that gives you leverage that can give some form of guarantee that what you hope will be achieved? Because in the absence of that, our leaders will run footloose and free as they've always run footloose and free without any recourse to thinking about what it is that they're actually elected for in the first place.
You know what's going to happen when you look at our statistics? More than 70% of those who are in the current regime, who are in the National Assembly or the Senate or the county assemblies, will not retain their seats. And it's because they have not honored the social contracts that they had with people. So in many occasions, we lament and say that we are a reflection of our leaders, but we normally vote them out after every 5 years. Perhaps then what we need to do post-2023 is to recall them. I think that's what you're trying to suggest.
No, I'm saying that when they are in the positions of power, instead of having to chuck them out every 5 years, what is it that we can have in place so that they actually do what they're supposed to do?
It is true that the accountability bit is the most difficult aspect, but then we can't give up. And that's why after every 5 years, when we come to the electing of persons into office, then we begin asking the question whether they have honored the promises that they agreed to. And so the more vigilant that the citizens are out there in terms of putting down and saying this is exactly what we want, then it is easier for you to be able to measure people against what exactly then you proposed. If we are vibrant enough and confident to be able to kick people out because they did not then perform as we expected, then it begins to infuse accountability within leadership. the voices of people then begin to matter. Representation, and you remember, not accession without representation, and where it drove 1776. But then I think we, for a long period of time, we have got to a point where like we want to throw in the towel. But then our 2010 constitution in terms of participation and accountability, it sets that particular framework. But then how we action that, are we able to recall people? If they do not then perform within what we expected, I think that is the route that we should be going to. But then now we have a particular chance to put out there what exactly then we require, so that then we have a benchmark to be able to weigh.
And if we're going to put down what we want, what will you do? What will we do to ensure that these are things that whatever you've put in place have the ability or the intrinsic capacity to actually be measured and determined? Meaning, let me say what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, a lot of the time when you talk about projects, is the leaders telling you what they're going to do for you. I would rather inverse it and say, are they going and ask the people what the people would like to have done? So when you know that, then you can say, okay, within the first year, I've got 5 years, itemize the things that you're going to do. So when you talk about accountability, it isn't difficult. You actually know, but this is what you're supposed to do. This is the money that you got. Where are we with this? It becomes easier. But when it's amorphous, I'm going to help healthcare. I'm going to help with education.
So perhaps that's where the conversation then begins, that the people then come up with their own...
They ought to.
Their own needs, their own manifesto. Is that what you're seeking to do tomorrow?
Exactly, and in the manifesto we are arguing, and there are conceptual arguments. You're asking that if you talk about the National Hospital Insurance Fund, you are proposing a tax-based model. I come from an informal settlement with intermittent income. How will I sustain a monthly contribution? So the People's Manifesto is people telling the leaders what to do. And the measurement should not be in the context of quantity. It's also the quality of the services that are provided. So that then communities will be arguing that if we talk about housing, it's not the number of houses you've built, but the ability of the most vulnerable to be able to access right to housing.
Okay. When we talk about people-centered governance, it is not something that happens when you wake up in the morning, obviously. These are processes that must be clearly followed. And it must be something that is habitual in nature as well, that the people are used to calling the shots, essentially, that the people are used to being participatory in the process. We just had a conversation earlier this morning about folks in Kericho who've decided that they are putting money behind one of their aspirants, and they're saying, look, this is whom we want. So you can see, as that process has begun, if peradventure this individual then gets the position, he's beholden to these people, essentially, to do what it is that they require. They've already set their needs in place. So now here we are with a population generally, for the most part, who's being fed, like CTS said, who's being fed what the leaders are saying. We are going to do this, we are going to do this, we are going to do this. Now we are telling them, you now must be the ones who are calling the shots. But they're not used to this. How then are we going to say, between now and the time you will go to the ballot, that it must be people-centered governance? How are we going to say that you've been involved in the process enough to start calling the shots?
Thank you, Undu. I think, and that's actually where it begins, that people must be able to have the confidence, people must be prepared to be able to voice out and to participate. And so that is where this particular conversation has actually begun, that the communities out there have been empowered to be able to come and speak about what exactly becomes your issues, to come up with manifestos. The conversation happening tomorrow has looked at people in the informal settlement who have been neglected for a long period of time. It has looked at people living with disability. It has looked at people, at refugees, people who have been marginalized over a period of time. And so how then do you even give them the confidence to be able to speak about what their issues are? And so put those particular issues down so that it's easy then to present these particular issues. though this is the beginning where you bring people together and you share that particular common document, moving forward, then the different actors within the civil organizations also begin to speak about what exactly becomes their issues. We're in that particular period where we need to come up with the CIDPs, the County Integrated Development Plans. And so even as county governments begin to have this particular discussion, is that have community been sensitized about to come up with what their needs are, so that as and when governments go out to the people to look at what are the issues, they already can be able to identify these are our issues and this is how we want them to be addressed in terms of the quantity, but also in terms of the quality.
And the question you have asked is about culture, that we've been used to a particular way of life where the leaders come and tell us.
Sure.
But culture is also dynamic. It can be changed through conversations. And I did speak earlier about developing a constituency that's got a particular conscience.
Sure. I hear you on that. But are we saying that this election is targeted? This election is targeted for this change? Because we can talk about it in the ideal situation and say this is the way it ought to be, which I agree with 100%. But if we're going to be realistic in terms of changing culture, this is something that takes time. So if I were to say that over the next few years, whether now you're holding people bound by a social contract or bound by a performance contract, they get to realize over time that, okay, I'm not just going to be able to come and do what I want here. That they will realize that there are people who I'm responsible for, that I'm accountable to get something done. But to say that people are going to be involved in the process so much so that they're putting people in leadership in August, in the next 4 months, that they realize that they are now part of the process, I see this as something that may happen in the coming period.
No, it's already happening. If it was happening yesterday in Kericho, we are lamenting about direct tickets.
But this is somebody who's been campaigning for the last. Somebody who's been campaigning for the last 20 years.
But I think what we're having is that the conversation is beginning, and this is not going to be an end. And so we do not want to take it as an event. And so within the next 5 years, then the conversation will be where are we towards the implementation of these particular issues.
Exactly.
That communities will be asking their elected representatives, where exactly are we in terms of these particular issues that we require in this particular ward? Where are we? How are we moving forward? So that every particular year when we're having the annual development plans, then the question is what has gone to the annual development plan, whether it's part of what we actually went out and put down,
identified as our issue.
Yes. And so I agree that we may not get to a point where we hold people responsible at a go, but then this particular conversation need to be sustained.
Absolutely.
If that is going to happen. And I think this is the beginning of the conversations. And therefore, every particular year, then vulnerable communities that have been excluded in planning processes are simply going to be asking themselves, where are we? Let us do stock taking. Let us see whether the pressure that we have given towards the persons who are governing has been enough, or do we have to employ other tactics for the same?
It may actually be argued that it's not the beginning of the conversation. The conversations always take place. It may be the structure of the conversations, that the conversations are happening in a structured manner, in such a way that someone can actually just open a page and know this is what the people want, or know that this is how to engage with the community. The community also knows that this is the platform where we engage. But those conversations, like Olando is saying, have been taking place. That's why we vote people out. We all collectively agree that so-and-so has failed. And that's why we are not going to elect them back in. We collectively think that so-and-so is a better option. That's why we elect them. But now, after electing them, the platforms for accountability are what is missing, which brings me to the question, is this going to create a platform for that accountability?
See, it does, because as Jamin has put it, is that every year we do the annual development plans. We have the county budget review outlook papers, the county fiscal strategy papers that we look at as communities and engage with. How do we then come back and evaluate as community that, we did make these proposals, they were in these planning documents, resources were allocated, and this is how the resources have been used. So that then we start engaging also with the independent offices. How are communities engaging with the Office of the Auditor General? How are they?
So Olando, so how are we creating those structures? Because now once we come up with a manifesto and we go back to the communities, there's a manifesto, there's a social contract that the citizens are signing with their leaders. Do you need a platform that engages with the two stakeholders, the voter and the leader?
Yes. And I did put it earlier that, we'll develop the CIDPs, right? And there will be public participation meetings. The manifestos shall be the documents upon which communities rely to make their proposals on the CIDPs. Then after that, then they will go to the annual development plans, where now they start breaking the manifesto and the CIDP into an annual development document, which resources is allocated through. Then they'll get now to a point of review. So then the question you are asking is that which structure will we use as a basis? When you look at the County Government Act, we've got the offices of the ward development officers, we've got the sub-county administrators, which anchor the space of public participation, which is invited space. But then how do they engage with social movements? How do they engage with organized groups within communities who have got a particular vision documented, the manifesto that has now been translated to a policy document? But Eric, also don't forget that the manifesto will just become a manifesto. It will only make sense if it is translated to a policy document that's now binding. And it will only become binding when it is in the CIDP.
But I'm thinking the individual community members, how do they engage? So that then they can collectively go to the ward rep and say, or not the ward rep, but the ward admin, and say, this is what we expect of the executive.
Exactly.
Or go to their ward rep and say, this is what we expect of our legislature. What is it that's going to bring the people together? Is it a WhatsApp group, a Telegram group? What?
I think as Ham is putting it, that within the ward level we have the invited spaces, the conversation where they have about developments at the ward level, and therefore communities are being organized at the community level so that they can be able to participate in those particular spaces. The spaces have existed for a long period of time, but then the question has been, how do communities then engage in these particular spaces? And therefore it's building capacity of communities to be able to voice what exactly their issues are. That public participation for budget making process, as you alluded to, is not people to come and say, this is what we are planning to do for you. But then community can be able to say, this is exactly what we want. So if then communities are empowered to be able to take positions in terms of what they want, then we are moving towards aspects of accountability. And then what representatives at the communities will not then be saying, this is what we proposed. But then was this actually our priority? And so looking at the manifesto being launched tomorrow, is that then it looks at all those particular areas and specific, this is actually what we want in this particular area, and this is what we want in this particular area. And so it becomes a platform of holding the representatives then accountable within these particular invited spaces, but also creating spaces and saying that we would want to create a space in this particular community where we bring the elected representative to ask questions, where are we making progress in terms of this? And so those two, both the invited and the created of spaces, then becomes to be platforms for accountability.
Okay. Let's continue the conversation after a quick break. 28 minutes to 8. This is the Situation Room. With us this morning is Siti Muga, our guests. Siti Muga, Jamin Kusuania from the International Rescue Committee, and Samuel Olando from Pamoja Trust. We are talking about promoting a people-centered governance, People Manifesto. Tomorrow, the National Convention of Social Movements on the 2022 political agenda takes place at Muungano. And then what we expect to get out of this is a People's Manifesto and some structures on how citizens can then engage during, into the election and post-election.
This is the Situation Room.
This is Eric Latif Nduoko, our guest Siti Muga, Jamin Kusuania, and Samuel Olando. Also joining us on the line is Ezekiel Rema, who's the president of the Muungano wa Wanavijiji. We are talking about promoting a people-centered governance, creating a People's Manifesto, bringing all communities together to speak with one voice and say, this is what we expect of our government and our leaders in the next 5 years. So as we go to elect them, this is what we want them to do. And Samuel, you're saying that then they will be signing a pledge.
Exactly.
And how do we present the pledge to them?
They should come where we are. They should come at the People's Manifesto Convention that we are hosting tomorrow at Muungano.
And pledge to do what?
And pledge to abide by the aspirations of the communities that is detailed in the manifesto. And that pledge that this shall be translated into the various policy documents that we look into post-August this year. And that they shall implement then the policy documents that they will have done.
Okay. You know, up to that point, I actually get it. Meeting, talk, agree, document, ratify. Good. How then do you ensure on a day-to-day basis until those 5 years are over that these things are done? What is the mechanism that you will use to ensure that these things are actually done?
Jamin, will you take that?
I think the discussion that we are currently having, one is that the manifesto looks at people who have been excluded in governance for a long period of time. It acknowledges that we have people in the informal settlements. It acknowledges people living with disability. It acknowledges that we have refugees. From the foundation, that one, Article 10 speaks about the participation of the people. Then acknowledging that then Article 56 acknowledges that marginalized people should also be part and parcel of persons that are actually involved within the participation process. How do you keep then your elected representatives on check through the entire period? It will take a lot of lobbying with the elected representatives. It will take involvement within the processes of government that exists. And I think the lack of involvement of people, and this, I think the County Government Act, Section 87 talks about reasonable participation. So how do you equip people that when they come to a particular platform, they can be able to participate? The reason for a long period of time, persons who are supposed to govern have run away with this is because people have not had alternative views or alternative projects. And so we have pushed for things in an abstract manner, that we want health. But then what do we want in health? We want integration, but what exactly do we want integration? So to answer CT is that the equipping of people so that they can have alternative views within the spaces that they will create, and also the spaces that will certainly be invited, are part of the avenues that we will use to be able to put pressure so that both county governments deliver within their CIDPs and also the national government. The most important part in this particular journey is having these particular issues find their way within the CIDP, because then the annual development plans are actually based on what exactly was in the CIDP. And so if we are able to push to have these particular issues in the CIDP, then we are certain that we have an entry towards ensuring that for the next 5 years, the things that will actually be in the annual development plans are actually part of what was in the CIDPs.
Let's bring in Ezekiel Rema, who is the president of the Muungano wa Wanavijiji. Is this one of those, the Muungano wa Wanavijiji, is it one of those community organizations or community platforms where people know this is how we air our views, this is how we come together and raise the issues that are affecting us?
Exactly, and they exist and come in many forms. They represent in market committees, they represent in neighborhood associations, the residents association. I don't know whether CT you normally participate in your residents association meetings.
My what again?
Your residents association meetings.
There's such things.
So you don't have one. You need to be a concerned citizen. So that then this become then the spaces and avenues in which citizens engage the elected leaders. And let us not make it sound as if the leadership are doing us any favor. They may choose to come tomorrow, or they may not choose to come tomorrow at the People's Convention. But then, as a people, we have got the responsibility of holding the leadership accountable through planning documents and engaging.
I don't want to pour cold water on these efforts because I think they're good. That way, even having a discussion about it, in my mind, is a good thing. At least we moved from just talking about it, we now want to do something about it. It's a good thing. my fear is not what you are doing. That's not where my apprehension emanates from. It emanates from what I've observed historically. Individuals who, at the very onset, appear to be the sort of people who ought to be elected into the positions that they are in. And then something happens when they get there. A year or so, they may even appear like they're towing the line and they're doing what they're supposed to do. Now, the check and balance is supposed to ensure that they stay along that path. Now, so long as we are allowing this great deal of democracy to permeate this process, you are giving an escape clause to these leaders. I would like to understand how they will know with certainty that you deviate at your own peril. No, with certainty. So that it's not a matter of discussion. You know very well that, okay, you don't do this, you'll be told, and sooner rather than later, you're going to have a problem on your hands. Why am I saying this? The issue of trust when it comes to political leaders is not something that I'm going to leave to the graces of what you may call good faith. No. It has to be ironclad so that we know. And they also know that if they don't abide by, these are the consequences.
Within the informal settlements, where a big percentage where the Muungano Wanavijiji comes from, is that the conversations at the community, especially targeting what that means, has been we are going to elect people into office based on these particular issues that we actually want. One of the reasons that some is saying that leaders have a choice to attend the manifesto launch or not to attend the manifesto launch is because at the community level, the Muungano and Wanavijiji are simply saying we want to elect someone who identifies with our issues. And the reason is that when someone is actually elected, they actually know it's from this particular background that actually got this particular office. And moving forward, it can become the yardstick that the reason why we do not elect then someone or we do not re-elect someone into office is because they did not abide on the issues that we certainly put them forth. And that's why that then now we have a clear manifesto that says these exactly are the issues. So that people know that we are electing them based on what exactly our issues are. And so the consequence then of not having our issues on the table becomes then the basis of us saying, look, these were the issues that we came up with 5 years ago. These were the issues that found their way in the CIDP, and these issues have not been followed to the latter. And so, based on this, then we're not electing. So that at the very beginning, even before the election, they know it is on this particular basis that our vote is being extended.
Elected or not re-elected.
Yes.
Let's bring in Ezekiel. He's now on the phone. Ezekiel Rema is the president of Muungano wa Wanavijiji. Hello, Ezekiel. Can you hear us now?
Hello.
Good to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell us about Muungano. Tell us about Muungano wa Wanavijiji. What is it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to share with you the background of Muungano. Yeah, Muungano is a social movement which was formed in 1996 during the time of KANU, when there was a lot of eviction within Nairobi. So the ideology of forming a social movement was to have an umbrella body that was to protect the housing and land rights, mostly for the urban poor. So since 1996, the social movement has been active in pushing or advocating for land rights and housing rights, and also other basic rights like water, health, and education in most of the informal settlements within Nairobi and outside Nairobi, mostly the 5 cities we have now. So the issue of the manifesto was introduced in 2002 before election of 2002. So that time we also prepared a manifesto of Muungano and Wanavijiji, whereby we were able to share with the two major parties, the NAC and the KANU by that time. So we managed to invite the president who was vying for presidential seat that time, the Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, And the other side of NAC, we had a team from NAC, led by the late David Mwenje. So we had two meetings. One we had at the Charter Hall, which was by the NAC, which came to take place at the government. And also, Kanu, we held our manifesto meeting at Kasarani. So this manifesto we prepared was able to help us after NAC taking over. Now you find that because they signed that they will never demolish the informal settlement, they will do some upgrading. So we used that manifesto, which they signed, to hold the NAC government accountable for eviction notices, which they issued that time in 2003, 2004, after they took over from Kanu government. So the idea of developing the manifesto and inviting those presidential candidates and the gubernatorial candidates, it is to engage them and understand that the policies they are developing during the campaign, it is not enough for changing the life of the urban poor. So we also decided that we must have our own manifesto, which explains the reality in the ground. Even though we have the devolved government, there are a lot of problems within those implementation processes. You find that most of the Kenyans from the informal settlement, they normally attend very few of them in those public participation forums, whereby you find that most of them, they are not so much informed, and some of them, they are immobilized by the leaders who have their own interests. So when they participate in those forums, you find that most of them, they are not so much informed. So Muungano has been doing what we call capacity building on those processes, and we are able to participate in this CIDP, the ADP, and the physical strategy papers, and also doing social accountability or social auditing on those projects within the wards where we operate.
Ezekiel, if I may interrupt you a bit. Ezekiel.
Has been there for sometimes over 20 years.
Hello, Ezekiel.
And have been able to influence a lot of development within the urban poor. Like in Kabimoto, we have a slum upgrading which was done by the community themselves, Muungano members. In Idaduro, we have houses. Mahera, we have houses. We have a blossom blocks within Nairobi, over 20 of them, through our influence. And we have managed to do some savings on our own, whereby we influence the government also to support on implementing some of the projects. So, in general, the tomorrow convention of Muungano, we are inviting the gubernatorial candidates and the presidential candidates to come and share the manifesto we have developed, so that they can understand what is our need. Even though they have their manifesto, we will see how they will adopt our manifesto. And after that, we know they are going to develop the CIDP as from August of direction.
But the big question here, Ezekiel,
and it is going to take for 5 years. So
he's not able to
we
hear
are
us.
ready to prepare our people, and we have been preparing our people to do the support of civil society organizations.
Ezekiel, can you hear us?
Jamin and many of them. Asante.
Ezekiel, can you hear us?
Yes?
Can you hear us?
Your voice is very low. I am not getting you clearly.
Okay, that's an issue again with the line. But then, just from what he's saying, the Muungano and Wanavijiji has been there for many years. They have come up with a manifesto already. Do you know the process with which they came up with this manifesto? How was it? Was it the Vijijis having meetings, coming together, coming up with a manifesto? Bear in mind that he has already said that civic participation is not so strong in these areas. That you find whenever you have meetings and people are coming to meet, it's only those that have been mobilized by the political leaders who also have their own interests that that come together. So how have they developed this particular manifesto?
Conversations were actually happening at the community level for the last 2 months. And the conversations at the community level were actually bringing together everybody. And for this realization, that for the longest time possible, we have had people who have been excluded from the participation process. And so what the Muungano and Wanavijiji was certainly doing is trying to identify bringing on board as many people as possible, people living with disability, refugee networks, and all that, so that they can be able to voice out in terms of what exactly are the issues. So that when you look at the manifesto, it's actually, for instance, specific. It will say this is what the refugees would want to be able to be addressed in this particular manifesto. So yes, we have a conversation going out at the village, not villages. No, it's Muungano and Wanavijiji. Vijiji is villages. But at the informal settlements, where they are trying to get what exactly are the issues of people. And when what you hear Ezekiel saying, even the specifics in Campimoto in these particular areas, is because the needs of the people in Campimoto are different from the needs of the people in Mathare.
Yep.
And so it was trying to gather what then their views are. Where their issues converge, then they are listed as issues that affect informal settlements generally. Where their issues are specific, then they are put their issues specific to this particular area.
Okay. For what we're looking at going into tomorrow, is this representative of the entire country? Or are we looking at Nairobi as a spectrum through which now this is looked at? And how then is the rest of the country represented in this? Because I think we all know that Nairobi is but a minority in terms of numbers. Representing the rest of the country might be difficult with just Nairobi as an option.
So I know we'll have representation of community leaders from Kisumu, from Eldoret, from Nakuru, and from Mombasa, who shall be joining the Nairobi community in speaking about these issues. And this is important because you look at the country now. We are developing at the county headquarters, and it will be important for Kisumu to influence the region. It will be important for Nakuru and Eldoret to influence the region, and it will be important for Mombasa to influence the region that they come from, so that then Nairobi become a place of practice. That then we learn from, and as a basis in which other communities in other regions can learn from, based on what Muungano has done.
And then going forward, I think we still have to go back to that point. So leaders, some of them will come, some of them may not come. And then we have communities coming up with their own manifesto. This is our need. Must it be that the leader who signs is who the community is going to consider for leadership? Or can we say that these are our needs, and whatever happens going forward, when you get into office, when the CIDPs are being developed, we shall come to the CIDP meetings with this manifesto. When the budget making process is happening every year and the ADPs are happening, we shall come to those meetings with this manifesto. Or what happens after August 9th?
The aspiration is that the leaders that identify with this particular manifesto are simply identifying that, yes, we acknowledge that these are the problems.
Yeah.
And so for the longest time possible is that the leaders have not identified with the problem of the people. And so what they will prescribe and what exactly is what ails a particular community are actually different. And so expectations are that the leaders that identify and acknowledge that these exactly are the issues that affect the community are the leaders that will be voted into office. However, we are also certain that they may not be elected into office. And so the conversation in terms of how then do we find these particular issues in the CIDP, how do we find them in the annual development plan, becomes an ongoing process that we are then going to be engaged into, irrespective of who then takes office, whether at the ward level, at the county level, or even at the national level. Then we keep the discussions in terms of what exactly our issues are moving forward.
Eric, community delegations shall visit the campaign secretariats immediately after tomorrow.
Okay.
And we'll present this document to them.
Okay. I've got to point out to you that, these candidates are going to be bombarded with very many documents to sign as social contracts.
Yes.
We were hosting a group last week which was talking about the same thing. You shall sign a pledge to be accountable and transparent as a leader. Here's another one. You shall sign a pledge to acknowledge that these are the needs of the community. Somebody else will come with, you shall sign a pledge to uphold peace in the campaign period.
There are currently meetings going on at the ward level whereby aspirants are asked to come and sit down and tell us what exactly is your plan. And then thereafter, they're also being asked to sign something stating that this is what they have said. I don't know that they can even keep up with what they've signed or what they're going to sign in the next coming weeks. How can we ensure then that accountability moving forward?
And that's why we acknowledge that we are going to be vigilant moving forward, that we're not going to give manifestos what exactly are our issues, then we'll sit down and wait for 5 years, then we see what is the check, what has certainly happened. And that this particular conversation in terms of any planning, any budget that is certainly happening, then the communities are actually voicing out, repeating what exactly their issues are, so that they can be able to find we can be able to find these particular issues actually on the table. And so, yes, there'll be many issues, there'll be many social contracts that citizens want to sign with their elected leaders. But then how vigilant we become within the next 5 years is actually what will determine whether we realize the aspirations of the community or we do not realize the aspirations.
Well said and well put. Jamin Kusuania is the Rebuild Advocacy Manager at International Rescue Committee. He's been here with us alongside Samuel Olando, the Executive Director of Pamoja Trust. And joining us on the line is Ezekiel Rema, who's the President of the Muungano or Wanavijiji. Tomorrow, this meeting that takes place at Muungano on the National Convention of Social Movements on this 2022 political agenda is an important one at community level. And it's an important one when you talk about citizen participation and citizens holding their leaders accountable before and after the election. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you, Latif.